Mr. Lucas, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Election of Trump is expression of the huge gap between the political system and the regular people. This was somehow, do you agree with that? And if so, what should be the response of the Western political system to this challenge, let's say so?
I think that Mr. Trump won, but not by a landslide. And in fact, Hillary Clinton got more votes than any white male candidate a Democrat has ever secured for the presidency. So Trump fought a good campaign in a very strange way, and he's now the president. We have to deal with that. And he tapped a seam of unhappiness and alienation in America with the way America is run, which has put him in the White House. Don't forget that the majority of people actually voted for Hillary Clinton, but that didn't make her president. But we need to be aware, I think, both in America and in Britain and in all the other countries of the West, that people are really unhappy with the way in which the world has been run for the last 25 years. And they often are not voting specifically on the issue in front of them. So Brexit wasn't really a vote about Brexit. I don't think Trump was really a vote about Trump. They're voting in protest, and we need to listen as decision makers and commentators about what's happened over the last 25 years that's made people feel so angry. How are the costs of globalization being shared? How are the benefits of globalization being shared? Do people feel they have a voice in the decisions that affect their lives? And I think we have to look in the mirror and say, well, actually, on some of these things we've done a pretty bad job, and we are now reaping the harvest of the mistakes we've made.
Is it really ready, the political system, is it ready for this response? I mean, to respond to these people who are angry for that?
Well, we've had this before. This is not a new phenomenon. And I mean, some aspects are new, like the use of social media and the disrespect for the truth. But political systems are flexible and they will adapt. And I suspect Mr. Trump will find when he's in the White House that life is much more complicated than he has made out while he was on the campaign trail, that actually he needs allies and he needs to make compromises, and we will, I think it will be a less radical administration perhaps than the campaign, which is good, although much damage has already been done. But we need to rethink the way we do politics and media and our institutions, and I think a lot of the assumptions of 1991, when we thought history had ended, are actually proving incorrect now. This system is not really working very well.
The most discussed issue was the possible relations with Russia. Do you think that Trump could be really comfortable counterpart for the Putin? Because Putin is really very much aware of dealing with the regular politicians, the representatives of the political system establishment, like Clinton could be. Is he really so much comfortable for him to deal with?
Not very. I think Putin is actually a bit surprised that Trump won. What he wanted was a messy election result where Trump would lose but would be a bad loser, and this would be debilitating and distracting for the United States. But Russia doesn't like unpredictability, particularly in strong countries. And remember, America is much bigger and stronger than Russia. So if your main adversary has gone from being rather predictable and a bit weak to being run by someone who's really psychologically quite unpredictable, that's not great for Putin. So I think he may come to regret the support he gave for Trump, because although there may be some things he can do with Trump very well, and I'm worried about the grand bargain and some kind of new reset or something like that, over the next 4 years there's going to be points where he's going to be really scratching his head and thinking, this mad guy in the White House, what's he going to do now? And this is not good for Putin any more than it's good for us.
And what about NATO? What is the Trump selection means for NATO and for all the Western approaches of trying to be united on different kind of issues of security or climate changing or all the other stuff, the universal values? What Trump's election means for these kind of approaches of the Western countries?
It's very bad, and a lot of damage has been done already, actually. So what we saw during the campaign with this loose talk, with the fact Russia was able to intervene in the campaign by hacking and leaking and got away with it, the disrespect for truth is already very bad for American prestige and for the the West's prestige in general. If you see the world's biggest and most important democracy behaving this way, that's quite bad, and we can't put that genie back in the bottle. That's happened now. I think that for NATO, the crisis is the biggest in its history. We've survived France pulling out of the NATO command structure under de Gaulle, but to see America questioning Article 5, which is the fundamental point about NATO, is going to be very difficult. Now, I suspect that Mr. Trump will realise when he's in the White House that actually Europe's rather important and NATO's rather important, and you can't get anything done without allies. And so this isolationist rhetoric may prove to be quite brief. But it's still dangerous, and I worry that while Mr. Trump is learning how the world works, Putin could do something. He may even do something before Mr. Trump becomes president. I'm also worried that Mr. Trump turns to Putin and says, let's do a deal, and that deal will be done over the heads of the Georgians and Ukrainians, and perhaps also the Baltic states and Poland, and would be catastrophic for European security if it happened.
Yeah, and you mentioned the NATO's biggest crisis we are facing right now, and the discussions of the EU's, the European Union's security system has been started already. And what does it mean for the NATO? Is it kind of rising up these skepticism towards the Euro-Atlantic security structure, and what it could be the European Union's security system itself?
The first point is that Europe could perfectly well pay for its own defence. Europe is 500 million people. It's a 20 trillion.
Yet.
No, so I think the first point is that Europe could, if it wanted to, pay for its own defence. Europe is 500 million people, and it's a $20 trillion GDP. And they're not failing to defend themselves because they're weak. They're failing to defend themselves because they're weak-willed. They don't want to spend the money. They don't want to identify real threats. They don't want to take real risks. They don't want to make real sacrifices. And I've been warning about this for 20 years, as have American officials. Again and again, watch out. If you carry on free-riding on American security, one day America won't be there for whatever reason, and you'll be caught with your pants down. And this is what's happened, and now Europe is facing the consequence of 20 years of spending the peace dividend. And we have to get our act together. Now, I hope very much we do that within NATO. I hope that the non-NATO members who will contribute to this will do so within a kind of NATO framework, because there's no point in duplicating what NATO already does. But the blunt truth of it is that NATO is going to be much more dependent on its European pillar than ever before, and that European pillar so far is pretty weak.
Let's go back to Trump. And do you really think that he's so much bad as he was represented by the media, by the other analytics or experts and so on? Or maybe he could be actually the frustration of his voters, finally?
I think it depends what we mean by bad. You know, we've had bad American presidents before. Nixon was a bad man, effective in some consequences, but he was disastrous.
As much bad as he was presented by?
Well, I think you've got to look at what bad means, and there's different questions. There's his the level of his knowledge, which is clearly quite weak. Well, we've had other presidents before who didn't know very much about the world. There's his inexperience in the political system, which is colossal, it's total. That means he's going to have to depend very much on Vice President Mike Pence and on the quality of his administration. But you know, these things can be learned. There's his temperament, which seems to me to be very thin-skinned and vindictive, and these are bad things in a president. There's the grotesque promises he made to pandering to the white nationalists and this anti-Muslim rhetoric, the isolationist rhetoric, the protectionist rhetoric. All these have to be walked back now, and people will be disappointed at the end. And I think that's really the worry for Americans, is that Trump will disappoint the people who voted for Trump, but he's already legitimized a kind of discussion in which very nasty and dangerous things can be said. So the poison that he's put in the system will be there even after he stops being president, and it may get worse. The problem for the rest of the world is we have to cope while Trump is learning how to be president, and he's undoubtedly going to make some mistakes, and probably we will pay for those mistakes.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.